Hello friends, very good morning and welcome to my channel Study and Grow. Today we are going to discuss a poem written by Nabakanta Barua called Measurements. Let's begin. It was the introduction of a writer, Nabakanta Barua, the most powerful poet of modern Assamese literature, is noted for intensity and sensitivity of expression, contributed immensely to the modern poetic movement by successfully experimenting with a variety of forms and technique. Measurement. Measurement is a poem written by an Assamese poet, Navakant Barua. He belongs to the new generation of poets in Assamese literature. The poem has a good deal of influence of T.S. Eliot. It reminds the beginning of Greek and depicts the purposelessness, hollowness, and faithlessness of modern existence. It bears the influence of the European decadent culture, which reveals the inner crisis of the human soul through doubts, apprehension, boredom, and frustration. In the poem, Navakanta Barua talks about city life, in which man has to go through an endless process of measurement, resulting into nothingness. The poem seems to begin with talking about stitching of clothing in a materialistic sense, but in its deeper meanings, it gives philosophical and spiritual perspectives. Different kinds of metaphors have been used to clarify the situation of nothingness and barrenness. The poem puts a kind of great inquiry before us why we always try to put things aside and do not show our interest in the situations and actions of the present. The poem seems to begin with the stitching of clothing by a tailor in his shop. The narrator of the poem proposes to visit the tailor's shop to give measurements so that the tailor could stitch cloth that fits him her. The identity of the narrator is not disclosed, and the poet uses the first person plural pronoun we to address the narrator. The poem begins with the measurement of a person by a tailor and turns into a deeper rendering of the inner crisis of the human soul. It takes a philosophical turn as the poem progresses into further stanza. The poem shows helplessness of human beings that they can only give only measurements. They seem to be only waiters and watchers. As T.S. Eliot writes in The Family Reunion, when Agatha says to Mary, "You and I, Mary, are only watchers and waiters," not the easiest rule. Life has become mechanical, that it has made human life a complete failure in almost every sense. It also reminds us of Matthew Arnold's Scholar Gypsy, in which he mentions how human life is divided into thousand schemes of wheat. The poem discusses different kinds of complexities of human life, in which man seems to be very helpless again and again. People commit suicide as they do not find any way of their problems and miseries. Even the letters of one's species are to be measured. This seems too much of the mechanical way of living, that Prefect also does the same. When he measures his activities in a restaurant, have known the evenings, mornings, afternoons, I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. The poem moves beyond the limit of modernity of the European traditions in the 20th century and link all human activities to reconstructive semiotic condition in which the signified is referred into an endless series of signifiers. At last, In the conclusion, the poem shows that all measurements of life are just an endless process, and there is no real measurement as such, and there is not any final cloth that is better stitched to fit us. Everything is just a process without an end and without any meaning. Therefore, the poet ends the poem with a rhetorical question: when will someone stitch the garment to fit men? Modern life is changing fast, and this change brings more boredom, incompleteness, and frustration. That leads to complete failure. Man is helpless and impatient, and he does not fit in all circumstances and stages of life. Therefore, all measurements are temporary. Men can do nothing but think and move on.